I think it's very important, it's very significant. And as part of that campaign, I extend my warm greetings to my dear sisters and brothers of Kerala. And I congratulate the CPIM State Committee of Kerala for having the courage to launch such a campaign. I think we are the only political party which understands that women's issues are highly political in nature because they challenge the very basis of the system of patriarchy in our society. And we know that that is political because it is subversive. It challenges the status quo. And I think it is very important because the LDF government in Kerala is committed to public policies which address the issues of discrimination and secondary status of women in many public fields. But what we are doing as a party is to challenge patriarchal norms in our social behavior, in our attitude towards girls, towards women. And therefore, we are challenging the pillars of conservative, orthodox society. And particularly now with the offensive of the right wing, such conservative attitudes tend to become prevailing attitudes. And obviously, progressive Kerala can never tolerate it. We must not tolerate it. And I want to state very clearly, this actually is a challenge to those conservative and orthodox forces who do not want to accept the equality and autonomy of women. So congratulations to the CPIM in Kerala and my warm wishes for this campaign. It is true and it is extremely disturbing that with the growth of gross consumerism, with the advent of particularly of neoliberal policies and the growth of consumerism, and also the fact that the rich in our country, those who have acquired wealth in our country, they use the occasion of marriage in two ways. First, as a display of wealth, and secondly, as the acquisition also of social status. And the evolution of the practice of dowry from a practice which was limited to the elite and upper caste families, now with capital's penetration and gross consumerism, unfortunately, it is spread to even those castes and communities which never ever had the practice of dowry. And here in Kerala, we are extremely disturbed that Kerala, which had the highest sex ratios, now we are seeing in the most recent figures a decline in sex ratios in Kerala. Now we have to re-examine those figures, but we also have to go behind the figures and see whether in Kerala now the question of sex determination and sex selective abortions are taking place. Because that is also very much linked to the whole concept of, in a social weighing scale, a girl, however brilliant she may be, is always weighing less than that of a boy, not because of her individual traits, but because of the centuries of patriarchal attitudes, notions, and practices which devalue a woman. So if it is happening in Kerala, and it seems to be, I think it is absolutely imperative to take this forward, the struggle against it forward. That every individual who feels oppressed and who is oppressed and has a complaint has to have mechanisms of redressal which are sensitive. Now, for example, the very fact that the Chief Minister of Kerala took the initiative and ensured that a helpline was set up for immediate registration without any bureaucratic delays, and the fact that in one day 115 cases were registered, So we have to look at individual cases also. We cannot just look at a bigger picture and not look at the individual. And we cannot just look at the individual without looking at the big picture. But yes, I expect that the low conviction rates, which are there all over the country in Kerala, the conviction rates of those who are responsible for abuse and violence against women will be punished. And that is a very, very important part, a very important part of changing attitudes. If those who are guilty get punished, unfortunately, in our society, the conviction rate, even for a crime like child rape, is so low. 70 to 75% of people get away with it. So let us not pit the individual versus the public. They're both equally important in any movement for Sri Paksha. In other states, they are not trying to have a social campaign against it. And particularly in the BJP ruled states, what we are seeing is a deliberate attempt to defend the perpetrators of violence. And don't forget, this is also linked to the caste system. It's also linked to Manuvadi ideologies. And in all the other states, these are the predominant ideologies. And these are the frameworks in which women are expected to conform to certain subordinate frameworks of social behavior. And if you cross the Lakshman Rekha set to you by these elitist upper caste forces, then you deserve what you get. And therefore, a woman gets stigmatized, gets traumatized, and gets victimized, not just by one perpetrator, but by social attitudes. So in other states, I think Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan, in the last 10 years, what I have seen of public life, I think he must be the only chief minister who has come out so strongly and so powerfully to try and change social attitudes. Unless people who have important elected positions, chief ministers, ministers of governments, members of parliament, MLAs, local body elected representatives at every level, unless they speak out. This is not a question of one woman's activist or women's organization. And I think Pinarayi Vijayan, is the only chief minister, at least in my knowledge, in the last 10 years at least, who has spoken out and come out clearly and said, yes, I'm in favor of a change in our educational syllabus also. Now, these are very important aspects. And if they are followed through, I think Kerala is going to set an example, as it has in so many other spheres, for women's equality. And I say women's equality and autonomy. And if we are talking about Sri Paksham Kerala, it is extremely important that the issue of the domestic sphere and domestic responsibility and the unequal division of labor within the home should also be addressed by this campaign. So whereas we want to lighten the domestic burdens of women, a very important component of that is the attitude of men, which has to change to also help in domestic work. Because if you look at so many important employment avenues where, because of left interventions, women have got more jobs in education, in school education, in the medical field as nurses, as medical workers. There's been tremendous appreciation of the role of women in all these spheres, and now in the service sector also. But men, have they increased their responsibilities at home and in the kitchen? I'm afraid not. My point is simply this. When we talk about equality, we also must talk about autonomy, women's autonomous choices. And I say the Constitution of India does not stop at the door of the home. It does not stop at the door of the bedroom. And a Kerala, which is sensitive, committed, and dedicated to people's freedom from exploitation and oppression and discrimination, obviously must ensure that conservative orthodox attitudes towards women, based on a control of their sexuality, dress codes, behavior codes, talking codes, language codes, going out codes, friendship codes, choosing partner codes. All this is a framework of imprisoning women. And only the CPIM as a political party has the commitment and the courage and the determination to challenge that unequal framework. But we should know that is what Stree Paksham Kerala has to aim towards. And I'm sure this campaign will not end in a week. Yes, the formal campaign will end in a week, but this understanding and approach must become an intrinsic part of our thinking, our speaking, and our work.